Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Would You Read It Challenge video for September 2025. The Would You Read It Challenge is a meme started by @2brody, whom I'll link to down below. The original purpose of this tag is that you should pick a variety of books based on whatever metric you'd like, read the first sentence of each book, and then ask your audience if you'd like them to continue with each book. I decided one sentence just isn't enough to get the gist of a story, so I elongated it to, well, it's supposed to be like a couple paragraphs to a page, what have you. And I've been doing this tag relatively monthly for the last couple years, and for the books I'm pulling from old ballots of the BookTube Prize. So the BookTube Prize was started by Robert Sheard in 2019 as a way for the literary bookternet to come together and judge the best in literary fiction and nonfiction. We start with ballots of 6 books in the Octofinals, several ballots of 6 books in the Octofinals, our first round, and then whittle them down through 4 rounds into, winners and runners-up. For 2025, where we're judging 2024 books, we are now not only in the final round, but basically in the final week. Things are really ticking down that some of us should take notice of because we have ballots that will be due soon. I have 1 more book left. But anyway, I can't talk about the round I'm officially judging right now, but I can talk about books from yesteryear. And I've particularly been focusing on the fiction ballots, trying to read the first, few paragraphs to a page of every book in fiction that's been a contender in the BookTube Prize. And I've been going in chronological order, and this month I am up to year 2022, ballot number G. Please excuse any construction noise. Anyway, I think this video might be a little longer than usual. I think the sections I took from are a little longer than usual, and I don't necessarily feel great about it because I think I was like waiting for the gist to happen where I felt like I had a good grasp on, what this story would be about, but it kind of took longer than I think to get there. I haven't read any of these books. I've just read, the first page or whatever of each of them. First by prepping for this video, and now reading them aloud to you, and maybe my opinion will shift and I'll ramble about something else. But I'll just get to it now, read the pages, give my thoughts, and then I'd love to hear yours. So without further ado, let's get into it, starting with book number 1. I would like to say a few things about my first husband, William. William has lately been through some very sad events. Most of us have. But I would like to mention them. It feels almost a compulsion. He is 71 years old now. My second husband, David, died last year, and in my grief for him, I have felt grief for William as well. Grief is it's such a solitary thing. This is the terror of it, I think. It is like sliding down the outside of a really long glass building while nobody sees you. But it is William I want to speak of here. His name is William Gerhardt, and when we married, I took his last name, even though at the time it was not fashionable to do so. My college roommate said, "Lucy, you're taking his name? I thought you were a feminist." And I told her that I did not care about being a feminist. I told her I did not want to be me anymore. At the time, I felt I was tired of being me. I had spent my whole life not wanting to be me. That is what I thought then. So I took his name and became Lucy Gerhardt for 11 years. But it did not ever feel right to me. And almost immediately after William's mother died, I went back to the motor vehicle place to get my own name back on my driver's license, even though it was more difficult than I had thought it would be. I had to get it back and bring some court documents, but I did. I became Lucy Barton again. And that was from Oh William by Elizabeth Shroud. Book 2, 1. It is never easy to move to a new country, but in truth I was happy to be away from New York. That city had become disorienting to me after my father's death, and my mother's sudden retreat into Singapore. For the first time, I understood how much my parents had anchored me to this place none of us were from. It was my father's long illness that had kept me there, and with its unhappy resolution, I was suddenly free to go. I applied for the position of staff interpreter at the court on impulse, but once I had accepted the job and moved to The Hague, I realized I had no intention of returning to New York. I no longer knew how to be at home there. I arrived at The Hague with a 1-year contract at the court and very little else. In those early days, when the city was a stranger to me, I rode the tram without purpose and walked for hours at a time, so that I would sometimes become lost and need to consult a map on my phone. The Hague bore a family resemblance to the European cities in which I'd spent long stretches of my life, and perhaps for this reason I was surprised by how easily and frequently I lost my bearings. In those moments, when the familiarity of streets gave way to confusion, I would wonder if I could be more than a visitor here. Still, as I traversed the roads and neighborhoods, I had a renewed sense of possibility. I had lived with my slow-moving grief for so long I had ceased to notice it or recognize how it blunted my feeling. But now it began to lift. A space opened up. As the days passed, I felt I had been right to leave New York, although I didn't know if I'd been right to come to The Hague. I saw the details of the landscape in high, and sometimes startling relief, because the place was not yet worn down by acquaintance or distorted by memory, and because I had begun looking for something, although I did not know exactly what. And that was from Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. Book 3, Chapter 1, Lübeck, 1891. His mother waited upstairs while the servants took coats and scarves and hats from the guests. Until everyone had been ushered into the drawing room, Julia Mann remained in her bedroom. Thomas and his older brother Henrik and their sisters Lula and Carla watched from the first landing. Soon they knew their mother would appear. Henrik had to warn Carla to be quiet or they would be told to go to bed and then they would miss the moment. Their baby brother Victor was sleeping in an upper room. With her hair pinned back severely and tied in a colored bow, Julia stepped out from her bedroom. Her dress was white and her black shoes, ordered specifically from Majorca, were simple like a dancer's shoes. She joined the company with an air of reluctance, giving the impression that she had, just now, been alone with herself in a place more interesting than the festive Lübeck. On coming into the drawing room, having glanced around her, Julia would find among the guests one person, usually a man, someone unlikely as Herr Kellingshusen, who was neither young nor old, or Franz Cordovius, his squint inherited from his mother, or Judge August Leverkuhn, with his thin lips and clipped mustache, and this man would become the focus of her attention. Her allure came from the atmosphere of foreignness and fragility that she exuded with such charm. There was kindness in her flashing eyes as she asked her guest about work and family and plans for the summer, and speaking of the summer, she would wish to know about their grand hotels in places as distant as Trouville or Courrières, or some resort on the Adriatic. And soon she would pose an unsettling question. She would ask what her interlocutor thought about some normal and respectable woman within their group of associates. The suggestion was that this woman's private life was a matter of some controversy and speculation among the burghers of the town. Young Frau Stavenhitter, or Frau Mackenthun, or old Fraulein Distelmann, or someone even more obscure and retiring. And when her bewildered guest would point out that he had nothing other than good to say about the woman, in fact had heard nothing beyond the very ordinary to transmit, Thomas's mother would express the view that the object of their discussion was, in her considered opinion, a marvelous person, simply delicious, and Lübeck was lucky to have such a woman among its citizens. And that was from The Magicians by Colm Tóibín. Book 4, C'est pas tout blessé qui guérit, Not All Wounds Heal, 1860. I saw my mother raise a man from the dead. It still didn't help him very much, my love, she told me, but I saw her do it all the same. That's how I knew she was magic. The time I saw Mama raise a man from the dead, it was close to dusk. Mama and her nurse Lenore were in the office, Mama with her little greasy glasses on the top of her nose, balancing the books, and Lenore banking the fire. That was the rule in Mama's office. The fire was kept burning from dawn until after dinner, and we never let it go out completely. Even on the hottest days, when my linen collar stuck to the back of my neck and the belly of Lenore's apron was stained with sweat, a mess of logs and twigs was lit up down there, waiting. When the dead man came, it was spring. I was playing on the stoop. I'd broken a stick off the mulberry bush, so young it had resisted the pull of my fist. I'd had to work for it. Once I drenched it off, I stripped the bark and rubbed the wet wood underneath on the flagstone, pressing green into rock. I heard a rumbling come close and looked up, and I could see down the road a mule plodding slow and steady with a covered wagon, a ribbon of dust trailing behind it. In those days, the road to our house was narrow and only just cut through the brush. Our house was set back. Grandfather, my mother's father, had made his money raising pigs and kept the house and pens away from everyone else to protect his neighbors and his reputation from the undermining smell of swine. No one respects a man, no matter how rich and distinguished looking, who stinks of pig scat. The house was set up on a rise so we could always see who was coming. Usually it was Mama's patients, walking or limping or running into her office. Wagons were rare. And that was from Liberty by Caitlin Greenridge. Book 5. Oh, you will find me an acre of land, savory sage, rosemary, and thyme, between the sea foam and the sea sand, or never be a true love of mine. Scarborough Fair, traditional English ballad. 1. The morning sky lightens and a new snow falls on the cottage. It falls on the thatch, concealing the moss and the mouse damage, smoothing out the undulations, filling in the hollows and slips, melting where it touches the bricks of the chimney. It settles on the plants and the bare soil in the front garden and forms a perfect mound on top of the rotten gatepost, as though shaped from the inside of a teacup. It hides the roof of the chicken coop and those of the privy and the old dairy, leaving a dusting across the workbench and the floor where the window was broken long ago. In the vegetable garden at the back, the snow slides through the rips in the plastic of the polytunnel, chills the onion sets 4 inches underground, and shrivels the new shoots of the Swiss chard. Only the head of the last winter cabbage refuses to succumb, the interior leaves curled green and strong, waiting. In the high double bed up the left staircase, Dot lies beside her adult daughter, Jenny, who was gently snoring. Something different about the light in the room had woken up Dot, and she can't get back to sleep. She gets out of the bed, floorboards cold, air colder, and she puts on her dressing gown and slippers. Their dog, Jenny's dog, a biscuit-colored lurcher who sleeps with her back to the chimney breast, raises her head, inquiring about the early hour as Dot passes, lowering when she gets no answer. Downstairs in the kitchen, Dot jabs at the embers on the range with the poker and shoves in a ball of paper, some kindling, and a log. She feels pain. Behind her left eye, between her left eye and her temple. Does the place have a name? She needs to go to the optician, get her eyes checked, but then what? How will she pay for new glasses? She needs to take her prescription to the chemist, but she is worried about the cost. The light is rung down here, too. Lowing? Owing? Glowing? She touches her temple as though to locate the soreness and sees through the curtains in the gap where they don't quite meet that it is snowing. It is the 28th of April. And that was from Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. And finally, Book 6. Mi patria es la tierra. Arturo Sarquedo Martinez, Sentido de Patria. Diasporism is my mode. R.B. Kitaj, First Diasporist Manifesto. 1. It was her idea to tie up the nun. The dormitory lights were cut every night at 10. Locked into their rooms, girls commanded to a cemetery of silence before sleep, waking at dawn for morning prayers. The nuns believed silence a weapon, teaching the girls that only with it could they discover the depths of their interior without being servants to the temptations of this world. To be fair, the nuns were not all terrible. Some Talia liked very much. She even admired how they managed to turn the condemned penitentiary population into a mostly orderly domitas. It was a state facility, a prison school for young offenders, not a convent and no longer a parochial school. The lay staff reminded the sisters to aim for secularity, but on those missioned mountains, the nuns ran things as they pleased. During the day, under the nuns' watch, the girls practiced their downcast gazes. They attended classes, therapy sessions, meditation groups, completed chores uniformed in gray sweats, hair pulled back. Forbidden from gossip and touching, they did both when out of sight. At night, in the blackness of their dormitory, they gathered to whisper in shards of window pane moonlight. When the nuns patrolled the halls outside their room, they became masterful mutes, reading lips, inventing their own sign language, moving quiet as cats, creeping like thieves. They listened for the nuns' footsteps on the level below, sensing vibrations on the wooden floor planks. The search for rule breakers, disruptors their guardians would schedule for punishment at daybreak. The night of the escape, the girls made purposeful noise as the nun on duty would come to tell them to be quiet. Sister Susanna was on night shift. There were many latecomer nuns at the facility, left over from some other failed life. The rumor was Sister Susanna was married until her husband divorced her because she couldn't have children. The plan originated with Talia, or maybe her father deserved the credit. That afternoon, she was given rare permission to phone him from the administrative office. Family contact was restricted, since staff believed they could be the girls' worst influence. Talia hoped to hear Morrow say he found a way to free her, to have her sentence lifted. Paid a fine or convinced one of the other rich residents of the apartment building where he worked as a janitor to call in a favor on her behalf. One never knows who might be listening, especially in quasi-jail for minors, some of whom were murderers on the verge. Talia and Morrow were careful with their words. There was nothing more he could do. She understood. Liberating herself from the prison and the country would be up to her. And that was from Infinite Country by Patricia Engel. Okay, so I guess I'll start at the beginning with O. William by Elizabeth Strout. This is not one of the Elizabeth Strout books I've read, but this year for the BookTube Prize Octofinals, I did read Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. This, in fact, seems like a continuation of that book, where Strout is bringing multiple characters from her earlier books in, and Lucy Barton also figures prominently in this book. I think she's like in the beginning chapter when she meets Olive Kitteridge, and I remember thinking Olive Kitteridge was rather judgmental toward her, although that's in character for Olive Kitteridge. But after this beginning of this book, I kind of feel like she had a point, because, you know, throughout this, you know, beginning few paragraphs, she's like, let me talk about my husband William, but she mostly talked about her other husband or herself, so she did seem like rather self-centered and maybe a little melodramatic. So it does, I guess, give a sense of the character that I assume we'll continue to see throughout this book, although I think by this book she's a little, you know, chilled out. Then we have Intimacies by Katie Kitamura, and maybe this one is my favorite. Or maybe I'm just biased because with a more recent book, she just, as I'm filming, made it onto the short list of the Booker Prize. But I feel like, I don't know, this one, you know, even though it's ruminative without any, you know, dialogue or a lot of, you know, well, action of any sort. It seemed to flow nicely and made me think about, you know, what it would mean if you moved to a new city because, you know, your father died and your ties to the old one were broken, and, you know, she's trying to find her place. So The Hague is like a character in and of itself in a way. So I guess that's what intrigued me about this one. Then we get to book 3 into The Magicians by Colm Toibin, and that's where things with these next couple books kind of fall apart for me a little. I think it starts with this interesting premise that doesn't deliver. You know, I'm speaking from bias again, but of course, you know, with this German setting, I'm kind of thinking of the Nutcracker. It's, you know, the mother's wearing dancing shoes, and we're kind of expecting something great from her because the kids are waiting up eagerly in secret to see something. So I'm like, what, do they have an uncle magician? After all, that's also the title of the book. Or maybe their mother's a dancer who will, you know, perform an amazing, you know, dance. But no, the mother's just there to do a Mean Girls routine, you know, to sidle up to some random man and say, hey, how about that woman? She said, what a bitch, huh? Oh, no, well, it wasn't me who said that. It was somebody else, you know. She's just, you know, stirring up shit, basically. So it's a little bit of a downer. It just doesn't seem to deliver for me. I don't know, maybe it will later, but it doesn't, you know, on these first couple pages, I guess. And in a way I feel similar, although I think the next book, Liberté by Caitlin Greenbridge, does this better. But we're starting with the premise that the mother can heal people through magic, and we never really see that. We get much more of a setup of the environs, the rural like environment of what's going on, and that they come from money, but maybe they're a little bit ostracized or kept isolated because the money comes from a smelly source, I guess, with the pigs. But we don't really see what's going on with the healing. We just know that, we're going to open, I guess, with this person on a mule, and that's unusual or something. But I don't know. It still didn't deliver, at least in these first few paragraphs. Next, we get to Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller, and by this point, maybe I'm already feeling a little critical, because I'm like, do we need all this, set up with the snow, for God's sake? I mean, or can we get to the character and, like, what's important? And the big thing with this character seems to be she's having a significant issue with her eye that she needs to see a doctor about, but she's concerned about her finances, and that's a pretty, compelling and relatable story for a lot of us. So the snow is a bit much, although I do think the author is very much trying to bring home the point that this snow is just oppressively present, like even as late April, which for most of us is like, what's going on here? So anyway, speaking of oppressiveness, I think the sun is coming into my face now, and I've had to stop and start a lot of times with filming because of siren noise outside, so I guess we all have our things in our environment. And then finally we get to book 6, which once again I feel like, we have it like teases us with this great first line about tying up a nun, but it takes a while for us to actually get to that point in this book, which is Infinite Country by Patricia Engel, which I actually think I got this book for my mother one year for Mother's Day, but I don't know if she's read it and I haven't read it. And I mean, I'm intrigued, but I do feel like we moved away from the interesting part. But then again, obviously we have to have some setup about where this girl is. She's in a sort of a penitentiary school for people who've had offenses. And it's run by nuns, even though it's technically supposed to be secular. I'm wondering if this takes place in Italy, particularly because the father's first name is Mauro, which is my last name, but in Italy, Mauro is in fact a male first name. And he is helping her escape and thinks she even needs to escape the country, not just this penitentiary. So makes me think, what did she do? What did Talia do? But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think this one won me back. But it's like, it started with we're gonna tie up a nun, and then we had a lot of like description about where they were, and I don't think we've gotten to tying up the nun yet, but presumably that's coming. So those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours, especially if you've read these and how you think these books ultimately went. I guess I'm thinking if I were to add a book to my TBR, it would be Intimacies, or it might actually be Infinite Country, one or the other. But it'll probably be neither, because I already have too many books on my TBR as it is. And with that, that about covers it for me now, before the sun completely comes into my face. We are reaching the end of September, so yeah, once again, for all my BookTube Prize judges, I hope you're doing well with your readings, so your ballots can be submitted on time. I'm hoping to squeeze in at least one more video before October, and next video should be my September book haul, so stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.